Center for Business and Governance at Noor University Business School. I am a manager of the project Global Development in the Arctic, Cooperation for the Future. This is a book project, a book we started to work with about 1 year ago. Today, we're going to present you some results of our work, namely the scenarios for the Arctic, international cooperation in the Arctic. We have a team of dedicated Arctic researchers, about 30 persons working with Arctic issues in Russia, Norway, Canada, US, Finland, and we work with this book. First, we started with individual chapters where each team of authors gave their perspectives on international cooperation in the Arctic from own perspective, like energy, higher education, culture, innovations, and so on. And now we are trying to combine. We work with scenarios, and we had a workshop 2 days, yesterday and this morning, with our authors, and we produced some outlines for future scenarios for international cooperation in the Arctic. The scenarios are not forecast, so we are not going to tell you about how the future would be, but we invite you to inform debate about critical things which are really critical for the Arctic future. First, you will hear and see the presentations from each group. There would be 3 presentations made by our excellent moderators from each group. And then we are going to have a discussion of the presented scenarios and also open for questions from the audience. Now, I would like to invite the first speaker, Roman Okolchuk. He is online. Roman works as a senior researcher at the Norwegian Institute of Foreign Affairs, and he led a digital group. We have quite many people who could not come to Buda, but this is an international group which worked very hard, and now we are eager to listen to your results. So, Roman, the screen is yours. Yes, Roman, please go ahead.
Good afternoon.
Yep.
Pleasure to be here and the work that we in our team did, and it's great that we can be the first. As I said to our group that we were a bit disadvantaged since we are doing it digitally. However, I hope that this will have no implications for the quality of our work that you will see in a moment as I start sharing my screen. Just a second. Can I share my screen?
Roman, actually we have your presentation. We received that, so maybe our technical people can start your file on the big screen. It is possible. Yes, Roman, now we can see your presentation.
Okay, very good. I should also be able to see it. Just a second, because I don't see it.
It's the first slide.
Okay, so then just a few about our team. As you can see, it includes a team, various backgrounds and expertise. It's really fascinating to work together on this exercise because I think it was a very good mutual learning for us. So please, so if you can go to page number 2. So I'd like to start with our assumptions based on our group discussions yesterday and also the separate group works and combining different inputs. So we believe the future of the Arctic by 2035 will involve the following assumptions. With change will become the main driver for the political agenda, also business development. We can also see the continued globalization, digitalization and to be more actively and widely used in the Arctic. We also think that the Arctic ice is melting, which can lead to an increased shipping activity. Also, we believe there'll be an increased importance and strength of the indigenous communities. So with the current and future trends will prove that the local communities can play a more significant role in the economic, political, and business developments. We also see the overall rapid technological development. Demographics might still be an issue in the Arctic. Also, we think that LNG transportation will grow. However, the Northern Sea route will not yet be a transport route between Europe and Asia. It might be emerging by that time, but still we don't think that it will be at the scale that many people anticipate. We also there might be some push towards more Arctic tourism, continued extraction of different mineral resources, for example, in Russia, for which China would be the main destination market. We also see China continuing to expand globally and also to expand its economic presence in the region. Slide, please. And in terms of what we think, in terms of the uncertainties, we have the following. We have the following uncertainties where we have the scale of climate change might be varying. We can also anticipate the degree of global instability, which is different for different scenarios. We can also think of the increasing global interest in the Arctic, which will be from high to medium, depending on the scenario. We also anticipate cooperation among Arctic states, also the possible role of non-Arctic players, as we know it's increasing now. And we anticipate that for our scenarios, this can also be an important factor. Then we believe that the big powers are getting somewhat unpredictable and because of the global political agenda, it's being very hectic. So we believe this can also be a factor. Migration to the Arctic, low for scenario 1, medium for scenario 2, and high for scenario 3. And we will explain to you what it means. Then we also have the empowerment of indigenous people as also an important uncertainty that can play a role. Arctic protecting itself as a global national wildlife space, possible militarization in the Arctic, again, being represented differently in the region. Political tensions and power politics, demographic growth and urbanization, and finally, the environment climate attractiveness in the Arctic, we believe will be highest in area 3 and will be medium for the 2 other scenarios. Next slide, please. On the next slide, we can see the wildcards that we believe will be relevant for all scenarios. So we might expect a rapid turn of Gulf Stream. It's already taking place to some extent. However, with more rapid acceleration of climate change, one can expect this to happen quite suddenly. So this can be a factor of disruption. Possible military conflict, a new virus coming from the melted permafrost. As we know, there are millions of different viruses which are part of the permafrost in different parts of the Arctic. So with the melting permafrost, one can basically unleash this whole new universe of viruses. which can be an important wild card. Major oil spill and also the Greenland becoming independent, which could possibly also happen. I think this would, to a large extent, or could change the dynamics of economic and political relations in the Arctic. Next slide, please. So what we believe is that, and that's our first scenario, which is called a new and better Klondike. This signifies the importance of the Arctic and sustainable extraction and production of mineral reserves. As you can see, this picture showing a sustainable way of extracting. Therefore, we believe that there is a future Arctic where natural resources are prioritized. However, they are mined, produced, extracted in a very sustainable way. And this is why this is the title of our scenario, which I will explain to you in a moment. On the next slide, please. So we very much believe that in this scenario, we can expect some high and stable global demand for Arctic resources. We will also see progress in technologies that will be much more sustainable and can lead to the improvement of the environmental footprint. So we actually anticipate that in this scenario, the interests of all stakeholders will be taken into account, and reserves will be mined or extracted on a very sustainable and environmentally friendly way. We think that there will be general positive perception of resource development among the governments and Arctic communities. We also see collaboration among them working together. We can also see that in increased transportation and also communication in terms of the new emerging commercial infrastructure, right, related to these resources. Finally, we also see that many of the existing and future industries operating in the Arctic will be way more environmentally friendly and sticking to the highest environmental standards. And of course, the key question here would be the specific demand structure for Arctic resources. So what those will be? Will there be continued development of fossil fuels, or there will be massive focus on renewables? Also, how about transportation routes? Because sort of a network for the transport links. And the same regards the situation in the world politics. So how stable will be the world and what implications this could bring for the Arctic? Also, the key question under this scenario, the scope and directions of Chinese and other Asian involvement in the Arctic resource use. So to what extent possibly companies from Asian countries will be allowed to operate and under what conditions. We can also see that there'll be some ripple effects of resource projects for local and regional economies and communities. And finally, I think there'll be also a need to look and assess the capabilities of local communities to absorb and harness the changes. And in that regard, I think that under this scenario, it's highly critical that we see an improved education and actually education among everyone in the Arctic, including those who will participate in the activities related to resources. Yet we shouldn't also exclude the factor of, can you please come back? We shouldn't exclude the sudden factor of possible wildcard. Is it possible to return to previous slide? Yes. So we can also see that there's also the Arctic, for example, an oil spill or a similar natural or man-made disaster that could happen. And having in kind of this wild cards in mind, we should also then prepare for the better future, taking into account what could happen. So in order to be able to prevent it. Then we go to the next scenario. which was done by our create. It's called Arctic Cooperation Lab. As you can see, there's a place for everyone, and it's the future where the future of the Arctic is centered around the cooperation. Please, can we go to the next slide, please? So the main idea here is that the Arctic will serve as a role model for many other places in the world. So in a sense of cooperation. So we believe that under this scenario, the Arctic states and Arctic communities will find a way to cooperate with each other at the highest possible level. And this will serve as an example for other parts of the world. So in a sense, many will be referring to the Arctic as a place with the exemplary cooperation among the states. So many countries and many regions would like to draw on the experience of the Arctic. Many probably would also experience of the Arctic cooperation. And elaborate very diverse but so that the cooperation will be built around the protection of the climate change, also including the interests of the indigenous community. It will be also important to look at the environmental footprint, also when it comes to the avoiding things like economic marginalization, taking into account indigenous cultural resilience, technological development. We also think that the Arctic will make it, will show to the entire world that this is a vulnerable and quite a special place. And yet it can, again, it can serve as a model for other places on the planet to find a very constructive way of cooperating with each other. And we think that in this regard, the governments will not be the only driver of sustainable cooperation. It will be also other communities, other stakeholders participating and taking part and making this whole cooperation very successful. Next slide, please. So just to summarize this cooperation lab idea, we think that this is a small politically manageable region. So this is where one can agree on many things. We can also have the important role of the Arctic Council, of the Barents Region Organization and many others. We think there'll be different types of cooperation. So it not be only, it will be many ecological activities. And the idea would be also that the Arctic would connect to other parts of the world. So what's happening in the Arctic might also have implications for other parts of the world and vice versa. What's happening in Asia, for example, or in Europe will also have implications for the Arctic, but this will be managed in a sustainable way. So finally, this would lead to the situation that all the Arctic communities and residents will be involved in building this strategic cooperation with each other. This can also improve existing structures. There'll be a focus on shared commitment to environmental sustainability, and finally, portraying and showcasing the success of Arctic to the world community. Next slide, please. So after the Arctic Cooperation Lab, we have scenario 3, which is called Arctic. Sounds the same, almost the same as the Arctic. And the idea here would be that the future of the Arctic would be centered around making the Arctic an attractive place for technological development. Next slide. So this is where we see that because there'll be extensive cooperation, this can lead to some technological innovation that would eventually improve the quality of life in the far north. In different parts of the Arctic, significant innovation gaps. And in that regard, major infrastructure upgrades will be required. To some extent, we can see that the technology is already a major disruptive force. However, we can think that this will be overcome so that the Arctic would become more sustainable, improving the life of all living in this place. under this scenario will provide very, very easy access to new innovations. So we anticipate the emergence of a new type of a Silicon Valley, but in the Arctic conditions, so with its own uniqueness. So the Arctic will be really producing new ideas, new innovations, new technologies. And this will because the conditions, for example, that could be adopted from the Scandinavian countries and the attractiveness of the business climate and further improvement of this business climate will be done so that more and more companies from all over the world will find the Arctic as a competitor to other big technology hubs in the world. So we can actually talk about pan-Arctic post-secondary education capacity building. So that will be also a place where the most advanced education is taught at the universities, including, for example, at the Norwegian University and many others in the north. So that will be really at the cutting edge education at the Arctic. We can also expect very collaborative market development in this area. So the same as in the Silicon companies, tech companies cooperating with each other, sharing technologies, sharing ideas, and together creating new innovative solutions to tackle the most urgent issues that exist. Next slide, please. And in this world of ArcTech, we think that environmental monitoring and sustainability will be at the core. We also think that there will be rapid development of tech-based solutions, not only to the problems that exist in the northern territories, but also in other parts of the world. We think that there will be culturation and also remote healthcare. So these solutions will be provided by the use of these new technologies. We can also expect a high level of collaboration between the indigenous communities and other parts of the Arctic. We should also take into account that there'll be a careful identification of socioeconomic, cultural consequences of technological change. So we should really be careful with adopting new technologies in a sense that they wouldn't disrupt the local lifestyle or they wouldn't harm the environment. So these technologies will have to serve the people and the nature. So this is how we see technologies should develop and will develop in our Arctic scenario. In the end, we will have a very good government academic business collaboration. I think also balanced scientific, social, and together will be defined by the stakeholders in the Arctic, and that would be serving in the interest of all the communities. Finally, soon in 2035 in the Arctic world, we believe that there'll be new brands and new solutions. So today we talk about, for example, Google or Facebook. So we believe there'll be new Arctic-based IT brands. So the whole not only in the Arctic, but also internationally. And this is how the space for new innovations and for new technologies, which will then also spread beyond the Arctic. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Roman. Please stay with us. We will come back to you with questions after we listen to the next two presentations. Now I invite Professor Peter Nure. Please present the results of your group.
Thank you very much. Could the group who actually helped to create this stand up? There were 3. Fine. Thank you very much. Very excited to be here. Lots of things to learn from the others, I'm absolutely sure. But let's try to move in and say what have we been trying to concentrate on. And let's get the first.
Yeah. You can look that way,
There we
and
are.
your presentation is here.
Back. there we are. We concentrated on international cooperation. That is what we were after. What are the preconditions for international cooperation in the Arctic? What is the aim of international cooperation? So we started with this question. What is the aim of international cooperation? Because you cooperate in order to achieve something. And what we came up with was the Sustainable Development Goals. Basically, how to achieve a sustainable Arctic. And here, you all know that there is a whole list of them. We went through them and we basically said, okay, here are some that are absolutely key. Good health and well-being, SDG 3. Industry, innovation and infrastructure, SDG 9. Sustainable cities and communities, SDG 11. SDG 16, peace, justice and strong institutions. And then, last but not least, it was just not written here, the most important one is left out, but I will read it out. SDG 13, take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. So really, if you really want to concentrate on something, and what we concentrated on, because we had lots of choices, as you see, we concentrated on climate change and the Arctic. Some methodological clarifications. First, we said, how do we write these scenarios? And you can have a one-line scenario. Basically, you can say, think about this as a line. On one side, you have one scenario that says you do achieve sustainable development in the Arctic according to the SDGs. On the other hand, you basically fail in doing that. That's a very simple way of writing a scenario. It has been done historically. Jan reminded me yesterday that when OPEC emerged and the international oil industry started to have to face with this, the most famous scenario that ever has been written was the Shell scenario of 1970, asking the basic question about what happens if the international oil companies continue to dominate the international oil world. What happens if the OPEC world actually takes over and nationalizes the whole thing? And that was good enough for a scenario exercise. So there are precedents of making this simple. We decided not to do that. We decided to go for a fairly standard matrix 2.2 analysis, which I will come back to. And we decided also to center on all the Arctic and not only a part of it. We could have done a Russia-Norway scenario. We decided not to do that. So 1 and 3 we kicked out, and we stayed with matrix number 2. Now, and here comes the key question. In a 2x2 scenario, you choose 2 sets of variables that actually drive the scenario. And we went through the whole analysis and said what is certain, what is not uncertain. I'm not listing that to you, but I'm drawing a conclusion out of that. We decided that the most certain thing was that climate issues would be the absolute driving force of everything that was happening in the Arctic. So we decided to make that one of the axes. Okay? Here, level of climate and environmental cooperation. And we are including environmental as well as climate issue, okay? So that's the vertical axis. Do you have a high level of climate cooperation or do you have a low level of climate cooperation? On the horizontal line, you have geopolitical tensions. So basically, we went through and chose geopolitics, tensions, conflicts, call it what you want, that actually sets the, if you want, the ceiling, the sky over the whole exercise. And it's by combining climate and geopolitics that we feel that there is some insight to be gained. Let me say a little bit about certainties and uncertainties. We had a long discussion about certainties, and as the reason for choosing the climate is that that was the only thing we really agreed on, namely that climate would be the relevance for the development of the Arctic, and it would be the reference point for politics, for the business, for lots and lots of the actors involved in the Arctic would have to relate to that. So climate won by far the vote about what was certain. What was uncertain, and I will again not go through the long list, but we had a long discussion about China, because some of us thought that China would be the ultimate and the absolute most important actor over time, and some of us said that was absolutely sure to happen. There were other people who said that will not happen. We don't believe that. This is no automatic element in this story. So let's look at 4 scenarios then. The first one is scenario 1. This is what you call the bad scenario, where you have basically people don't talk to each other, there is no contact or there is no dialogue internationally about climate issues that are relevant for the Arctic. And you can make a scenario and describe this is the driving force. And that combined with international tensions, which make it even more difficult to actually talk to each other and to actually get into a dialogue and solve questions on a day-to-day basis or a month-to-month or a year-to-year or a decade-to-decade basis. Basically, the whole system freezes up. That's scenario 1. Scenario 2 is the good version of the same story, where you, instead of getting a downward spiral, you get an upward spiral, where people talk to each other. That, in a sense, also has a positive influence on the geopolitical situation, or at least, you can also put it the other way, namely that the geopolitics does not preclude or stand in the way of actually what happens in the climate negotiations. Scenario 3 and 4 are a mixture of the two. 3 is basically saying high level of environmental cooperation and high level of tensions. So basically, you make the point that people cooperate on one part of the universe and they tear each other to shreds over another one. Okay? So is that possible? Yes, it's a scenario, and we thought it was well worth to include. And then the 4th one is low-low, namely low interaction on solving this climate cooperation, but at the same time, low geopolitical tensions. Basically, if you want a very short way of describing it, it's a way of simply saying that nobody really cares about the Arctic anymore. And there are lots of reasons for why that's happening. Geopolitics might be totally preoccupied about something else somewhere else in the world, and to get back to what we know a lot about, namely energy, for instance. People are not interested in the Arctic. Arctic was built to a large extent around the exploitation of oil and gas. In 15, 20, 30 years' time, nobody, or the demand for oil and gas will be so that people will not invest in new oil and gas. So slowly, slowly, the Arctic will move into some irrelevance because of the collapse and the low-carbon future and the transition that we all know about. So here is the description which I just gave you. So that will be, you will find that on the website. And we have put some names to these 4. And no, my imagination stops when somebody else's imagination starts. So to explain the 4, do you have the, let me see. This is beyond my field of competence, so here we need some good. So can you give us, we all know that getting the names right of scenarios are absolutely crucial. And we are trying now a first attempt, if you like, to sort of give a name to these 4 scenarios that I described. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned several times Disneyland in relation to the Arctic.
Yeah.
And that's why one of the options we in a group came up to is to consider the scenarios as the Disney characters. So if we take scenario 1, which is the worst one, then we will have Tom and Jerry, who are doing something together, but they are in fight. So there is low cooperation and a lot of tension in that. It's not without hope, so sometimes they do something for each other, but generally they are in conflict. And in a way destroy the things for each other, or for the world, in other words. So the bright option, or the opposite option, would be to save the world. And then we consider that Chip and Dale, who are willing to rescue the world and always cooperate, and have, in this respect, lower tension and a lot of communication, and in a way moving towards the right things because they try to save the world. And the other 2 scenarios, which are like in between, if we take, for example, the one where we have a high level of climate and environmental cooperation, but low tension, that would be Frozen, because it's more about strong but individual characters who have the power to save the world, but they can easily destroy it as well if they don't use their power wisely. But they are strong, but there is a tension between them and the world. So they have a dangerous power. And the other, the second, in a way, simple or moderate scenario would be the Sleeping Beauty, when, as Peter said, nothing really happens, or business as usual, when in a way everybody shares the sorrow, but nobody wants to kiss. So these are, here you can have cooperation in research and education, for example, but not that much in more physical activities, to say it like that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It is very important, as I said, to get the right names, and this is just the first round. So there will be, up until I understand that the timeline is at the end of the year. So there will be more seminars to actually throw names around and to discuss and get this further. But that brings to an end the group's work. Thank you very much. And now, Jan, you are next in line.
Do I use this one or?
Yes, it's clicker for your slides.
Yeah, okay.
So your presentation is coming up.
Ah, excellent, thank you. Yeah, well, my name is Jan Dietz, and I have had the pleasure of moderating this group. You can see the names here, and I think everybody is present in the room. Evgeny, Irina, Rodve, Irina, Salve, Elena, Alexei, he wasn't here today, but he was with us yesterday, Elena, and Frode. So, we have been working today and yesterday. Now, why do we need scenarios? This is one example of why. All too often, we don't think through the next steps or the next implications of something quite obvious. Sometimes, the future is staring us in the face, but we really don't see it anyway. We all have blind spots. Some of us are half blind anyway. So we need scenarios to be able to see more of reality, I would say. And that goes in particular for scenarios that deal with possible, plausible futures. And that's what we've been working on here. So we have chosen to use the classical 2x2 matrix technique, which in essence is identifying the critical uncertainties. And what are the critical uncertainties? Well, they are what we believe are both driving forces that are highly significant and also deeply uncertain at the same time. And if you can identify them, you're well on the way, I think, to understanding something which is quite fundamental. So we worked quite a lot on trying to formulate which they could be. And we had a brainstorming, identifying a lot of both certain and uncertain drivers. And we ended up with two super forces, you could say, two critical uncertainties. One is the future role of Russia. To what extent will Russia play an active, constructive role in international cooperation in the Arctic, looking towards 2035? In other words, being able to make an imaginary leap, not just looking at current problems, but maybe imagining even more problems, or maybe even the opposite. And to explain why we chose that dimension, it seems to us that there's a tension here between the potential for disintegration, in fact, which is quite serious and dramatic. The domestic situation could change quite rapidly. On the other hand, there are sort of seeds of growth and the possibility of gradual progress. We definitely don't know, really, what will happen in the next 15 years. It could, in principle, go either way. There's also a certain tension between an isolationist policy in Russia versus maybe Russia, the EU, and the US coming together, basically in response to the growing influence of China. We think that's plausible. But actually, again, we don't know which force will be the strongest. So, the second critical uncertainty, in our opinion, which is somewhat like what we heard from the last two groups, has to do with climate change and green shift. Will the Arctic become a permanent global reserve or a new major source for energy, food, minerals, and other resources? Again, looking towards 2035. These are sort of polar opposites. So we have, on purpose, made this very simple. We have cut it up like two clear contrasts. On the one hand, the Arctic could become a domain preserved and reserved for the future of mankind, untouched, almost untouched by humans and new technology. And on the other hand, it could be the opposite, because the Arctic is full of resources, and some of them may even be more easy to access now in the future than they have been before, in the past. So, to put the things slightly into a caricature, it could become a new museum, an open-air museum, or it could be a source of abundant, very available resources for most of the world, or at least very many parts of the world. So here again, we have some interesting tensions. On the one hand, we have a growing concern for climate and the environment, which is easy to see in the media and in public opinion and in politics all over the world. And on the other hand, we have this open door almost, because it's easier now to foresee exploration and exploitation with the use of new technology, robots, machine learning, etc. One could also imagine maybe in the future a ban or a moratorium on exploitation in the Arctic. But on the other hand, one could also imagine a global consensus on opening up the Arctic for further use and exploitation. So, just to continue with all these polarities and tensions, one can see new sustainable business development in the Arctic, but also one can see a wild race for resources, almost like the Wild West, or more like the Wild North in this case. And finally, we have new generations with new attitudes, and also at the same time, protest movements like the Yellow Vests we have seen, particularly in Paris, in France. I don't need to go into detail because you all know about all these developments. So that's how we developed our thoughts about what we think are the two critical uncertainties. And then we started to sort of elaborate on the stories inside these quadrants. And we hoped to be able to develop full stories, but we really didn't have the time. But this is what we ideally would have done if we had the time. We would describe both formal and informal cooperation within each scenario, what would happen to the Arctic Council, to local and regional actors who would gain prominence, who would probably decline, what would happen to settlements in the Arctic, security, in a broad sense, but also in a narrow military sense, maybe, technological development, business and commerce, research, etc. The list goes on. So if we have another workshop, we could go into much more detail about all these things. But we did accomplish something in the way of writing stories and making these scenarios. So let me just show them to you. The vertical axis has to do with the future role of Russia. The two contrasts are an active and constructive Russian role, and the other one is a passive one. And the horizontal axis has to do with the implications of climate change and green shift. These are sort of givens. We know that climate change is happening right before our eyes. We know that the green shift is coming, but a lot of the uncertainty has to do with what happens next. What are the implications? So that's what we're trying to describe here. That might lead, in the case of the Arctic, to this becoming either a new museum or a source of abundant resources. And then we get four quite different, I think, scenarios, which is exciting. If we have an active, constructive Russia, and the Arctic is viewed as a source of abundant resources. Then we get Arctic bonanza. This is a world full of surprises, many surprises. So many surprises that we can't even tell which they are at this moment in time. But we can say that new actors will enter the Arctic with other interests maybe than traditional actors. There will be utilization of both renewable and non-renewable resources, we believe. Maybe there will also be an understanding between Russia and the EU about how this is to be done. And the Arctic Council, we believe, will be exercising some influence. Next, we have a scenario where we have an abundance of resources and they are available, and at the same time, a rather passive, inward-looking, isolationist Russia. What do we get then? We get the Chinese Arctic. So we're sort of, yes, making this a bit dramatic, of course. A weak Russia. New actors enter the Arctic, just like in the other scenario. The EU is highly influential because there's a vacuum here and somebody needs to fill it, and the EU can't accept China trying to dominate the Arctic. So there will be tension between China and the rest. The rest meaning most of the rest of the world. And the Arctic Council, we believe, will be used by China. But at the same time, the Council will lose much of its power. So, moving on here to a scenario where we have the Arctic as a kind of new museum, and also a rather passive Russia, we get a chaotic Arctic. Green and blue priorities will be common throughout the world. The Russian state is on the sidelines. On the other hand, it is quite probable that the oligarchs will become active in this scenario. There will be little to stop them. And the EU and the UN will try to regulate how the Arctic is developed. And in this chaotic Arctic, we believe there's the risk of quite dramatic depopulation, more so than in the other scenarios. So, moving up to the final scenario, which is a combination of the new museum and an active and constructive Russia, there will be Arctic tensions. And why? Simply because Russia will be very much geared towards using all these fantastic resources in the Arctic, whereas much of Europe will not. So Russia goes on its own way, exploiting both old and new resources, while the rest of Europe is holding back. And in this scenario, we believe the Arctic Council will be strong on rhetoric, but that's all. It will be strong on using the right buzzwords about climate and green shift, but there will be little will or ability to exercise power. So, these are the 4 scenarios that we suggest, but that's not enough, of course. And we also had some brief conversations about black swans at our workshop, but also during dinner last night. So we have black swans, and also we shouldn't forget black elephants and black jellyfish, but I won't go into what that is here, because then I will use too much of my time. So some examples of this could be, for instance, a new and quite different pandemic, something which is quite different from what we have experienced the last 1.5 years. The EU could collapse. Several people have said that this is maybe, it's not inevitable, but it's plausible that this could happen. Artificial intelligence could change international relations in strange ways. We could have cyber wars, much more serious than the sort of almost silent or invisible cyber wars we've had so far. And we could also have radically new energy resource. Maybe also radical new technologies that enable new utilization of resources. And all of these black swans or wildcards could change the logics of the scenarios we just have described. So that's what I've meant to say, and that finishes my contribution.
Thank you very much, Jan. Please stay on the stage. And also, I invite Peter, going to talk about your presentations. Unfortunately, we got a message from Roman. He had to leave us accidentally because his daughter is sick. So he had to go to the doctor. So it's just three of us to discuss. So the first presentation from the international group led by Roman would be, so to say, a side of this discussion, but we will take care of that as well anyway, because we are only in the middle of the process, so we are writing the book, so we will accommodate all those things in the book chapter. Before we open for questions from the audience, Peter and Jan, I would like to ask you a couple of follow-up questions. Jan mentioned black swans, or your scenarios, Peter, you did not reflect on those things like shocks or black swans, events of shock, that much. But both of you, what do you think stability of the scenarios? You generated 4 scenarios each. So can you compare those scenarios in relation to possible shocks, events of shocks, new pandemics, virus, war? I don't want to think negatively, but normally we talk about unexpected things, often like bad things. Can good things be unexpected? Or so the stability of your scenario. So please, what you would say about that? Peter, first.
External shocks, black swans that really will have a consequence on these 4 scenarios. That's what the schoolmaster has asked for. And
who is the strongest?
I think that external shocks, like I used one example.
Yeah.
Do you remember I used the climate discontinuities in Siberia, Siberian forest fires, and the methane leakage. And both of these things can be tipping points. They are really potentially, and that's scientifically proved beyond anything, that especially the methane leakage, but also the forest fires, can really fundamentally change people's, it changes reality, but it will also change, potentially, people's way of thinking about that reality. So that it's possible to postulate that, for instance, I mean, this year, an area the size of Netherlands burnt down in Western Siberia without anybody batting an eyelid in Europe. Next year, it will be the size of France, and next year, it will be the size of God knows what, Kazakhstan, just to think about a big country. So all I'm saying is that that in itself, and combined with the leakage or whatever, can make the actors get together and say, come on, finally I understand that here there is really something we have to come to grips with. And also, there might be great international tensions, but look, when China and US talk about anything, they talk about climate. They don't talk about trade, they talk about climate because they know there is a possibility of actually linking up these 2 countries and doing something together. And it's the same also with Russia. So, to make a long argument short, yes, these black swans, these sudden, unexpected events can have positive effects on people be coming to the negotiating table and sit down and talk to each other.
Okay, so bad things can push people to
Yeah,
cooperate and become better.
Not only in private life, but also in
Yeah.
the global level.
Yes. Yes.
Well, an example of that is the accident in Japan a few years ago,
Yeah.
which almost overnight, maybe it took a week, changed policy in Germany. So they decided that they wouldn't any longer risk nuclear reactors, using them as a main source of energy supply. So this was Energiewende, as far as I remember. That was the expression. As that was maybe a kind of tipping point then in public opinion. That drove home the point that this was and is for them unacceptable. But I think when it comes to the Arctic, one of the problems with all these disasters is that somehow they are out of sight because there are no people there. Maybe that changes with drones and satellites and social media, but still, that's the problem. An area the size of Holland can burn, but there's nobody there to report about it, really. So it sort of goes unnoticed. And there's also the danger, maybe, of normalizing disasters and catastrophes, because the media is all full of it. Almost every week there's a new disaster somewhere, and somehow it wears off. We can't take it in, really. So that's also an aspect of that. And I would say the definition of a black swan is something which is unpredictable beforehand, but predictable afterwards. Now that's a paradox. But what is meant by that is that by human nature we will always try to explain after the fact. Then we would say, aha, it just had to happen. There was no other way. It just had to happen. But that, of course, is just fooling oneself. Almost nobody foresaw the financial crisis, for instance. And even the pandemic, which had been foreseen, wasn't really noticed by those who were in power. So some experts, yes, but the majority of the people and the politicians, no. And that's one of the problems. And again, that's why we need scenarios.
But you don't need the concept of black swans. Everybody knows that there have been large catastrophes happening. If you increase these in size sufficiently, in the end, it will be picked up. So you are not dependent on the concept of black swans.
Yes, thank you very much. The scenarios are not forecasts, so we can't predict the future, but we talk about the future. Why are we doing this? How can scenario thinking and scenario work help us? Is it something about preparation to many various future outcomes, or is it something about learning about the present day through looking into the future? So what is the value of this scenario thinking, and how can we contribute better decisions?
Well, if I can start, I would say that maybe the most important point to be made is that scenarios help us to understand the big picture. Because the big picture is not obvious, usually, so we need to create it ourselves. We need to understand the driving forces that really shape and determine the future. So it's like, standing on top of a mountain, then you can see the whole landscape. And you might not see each individual tree, but that doesn't matter because you see the landscape itself. And that's something the scenario is going to help us do. So scenarios are not about being precise or accurate about this or that, but understanding the great changes sweeping through the landscape, I would say, and making us more sensitive to the fact that they might actually change. Making us more alert.
Thank you.
Anatoly, you gave a very good overview yesterday in your lecture about, how can scenarios be used and how they shall be used. And so I don't have much to add to that, but my own experience, however, I've used this in a number of commercial companies, and they have very clearly been used as a way to take better decisions, namely to make a decision robust in relation to different futures. So you basically you test your decision today and say, how will it survive in scenario A, B, and C? Okay? And I have in many ways gained from being in charge of scenario strategy processes and actually carrying these out in these commercial companies. And by God, actually having a kind of backdrop saying, you know, how will my decision be in that scenario of the future gas market for Europe as opposed to that one? It helps certainly to get better decisions. Of course, it's not. First of all, come on, it's fun to write these scenarios. So they might be useful, but they are fun as well when you sit and speculate about the world and think about it. So I'm very happy that I've had the privilege to be part of this world for many years. But so a combination of fun and usefulness. That's a good basis for doing something.
Thank you very much. Now we open to questions from the audience. We start with you being physically present here, but also those of you who follow us online. You can write your questions and comments in chat if you want, and they will be raised also. But we start here. We have microphone. Is it somebody who wants to ask something, or everything is crystal clear? Anatoly.
Hello. Could you hear me? Excellent. I was thinking about these wildcards and, of course, something related to cyber war. I think in your young group was mentioned the cyber war, but it's already going on. It's not a wildcard. And more seriously, it's not only the war. Actually, it's becoming more and more privatized in terms of as a business. So now it's actually a huge business, and I think what I'm afraid is that in 10 years we will be used to it. It's a just way of earning money. So I was just asking your opinion of what have you discussed in your group, how it was positioned as a wild card, cyber war.
Thank you, Anatoly. So,
Well,
cyber war.
Well, to be honest, we didn't have too much time to discuss wildcards or black swans. So those were just meant as examples, not exactly to inspire, but to frighten you. And you're quite right, cyber wars is already a fact. So we just imagine one of us that maybe there will be an all-out cyber war, something we've never seen before, something new that sort of submerges a lot of other conflicts, possibly. But I think it's also almost always useful to create a few wildcards or black swans when one constructs scenarios, because they will destroy the logic of the individual scenarios, and they can't be incorporated into them either, because then you would have to write new scenarios. So therefore it's always useful to have a separate sort of list of such surprises. And in my opinion, black swans is something that, not just my opinion, black swans is something that happens more often than before. Because we live in a world of sort of accelerated change. And that means that we should be prepared for more surprises than our parents or grandparents. Also, this has to do, I think, with communication today. The whole world is becoming sort of one sort of electronic network that speeds up both actual changes, but also emotions. Yeah.
I think that cyber is going to be the new normal, so that when we sit here and talk about standard things in scenarios like investments and all of things like that, in 5 years' time, it will be absolutely natural, and people will use references to cyber warfare or cyber incidents or whatever in the same natural way as we are talking today. And then you need new people, you need young people who can actually replace us and basically sort of get on with trying to explain to the world the importance of cyber warfare and whatever. And so you have it in cyber, but you have it in bitcoins, you have it in that kind of new world as well, which suddenly will change the real world as we see it. And therefore, we are not prepared for it. But as I said, Frode, you have to sort of get new people on board who actually can give us some input to this new world, and not just treat it as a black swan, because it will be the new normal.
Yes. New question, Irina.
Yes.
It's okay.
It's some kind of tensions. I have a very practical questions. Who will actually read these scenarios, and how can we make these scenarios as an important tool in influencing the important decisions? How can politicians, or are they going to pay attention to scenarios? Because I remember very well, once I was invited to a meeting when Jonas Gahr Støre, he was a Minister of Foreign Affairs, and he told us, the new Norwegians, how just in 3 months in advance, before the Berlin Wall was destroyed, he have been everywhere in Europe and asked all Norwegian embassies, what is happening? Something new, perestroika, what's happening? What's happening? What's happening? And when I was that something is happening, but it's like this noise. It's just okay, perestroika, perestroika, perestroika. Suddenly, one from the East German side started to run to Berlin Wall. The soldiers did not get instructions, and it was like a break from shooting. Another 3,000-4,000. And suddenly the Berlin Wall fell down, and the whole Europe and the whole world have been changed. It was no scenarios about that, no wild swans about that. So we but we now, we're professionals, we're doing research, we're researchers, we're doing it in a professional way. We're using the professional tools. How can we influence, how can we actually combine the arena of research with the arena of practitioners, that our scenarios as a tool can predict the Berlin Wall and have a positive impact? Just.
You don't need to go to the Berlin Wall. You go to Afghanistan last month. I mean, for God's sake. I mean, and here was the whole intelligence community in the United States, and the amount of resources they have at their disposal is just, by anybody's standards, staggering. And then nobody had even actually gone through and prepared a scenario for Mr. Biden, who said, at least here is another view of this. The whole damn thing can actually collapse within a very short time. Nobody said that. And in afterwards, it's absolutely ridiculous, because all you need to do is not only to look at the hardware and the sort of capacity that the Afghan army actually had, which was the only thing they looked at. They forgot to take one variable with them, which was very simple: willingness to fight. And if you had actually multiplied those two with each other, then you would have got a different scenario. So, come on. I mean, if you really need an argument for scenario building, go to Afghanistan. Yes.
Frode?
Thank you very much. It was very interesting to listen to you. And I think what we have been doing is very important. And the comment was more to Irina when she said, yeah, who will read this? Who should take part in this? And I think if we are good, if we are relevant, if we are asking questions that others are thinking about, I think quite many will read it. And just to tell you about the story from the last book, the last scenarios about the Barents Sea, we tried then to combine different kind of knowledge. It was from technology, it was from social science, it was from economy and so on. And I think that was a strength. So we should be very good in that too. And when you, Peter, say that it's not the old one, but remember that in all these groups there are quite many young people. So it is very important to be relevant. And as I saw your presentations, you are very relevant. And we know that this book has been through some kind of pre-evaluation from the Elsevier. And we have seen the experts' comments, and they are very good. And they are good because I think that Anatoly, Andrei, and all those who have been working with this have raised very important questions. And then I think there is also with such a book, there is coincidence. There are just things that happens. Anatoly and I, we were invited to go to China to present the last book, and Anatoly did. The China did pay. You had some kind of a Chinese Arctic scenario, and China paid. And of course, it was because the book was so very good. It was a good book. But there is one thing in addition, and that was that when we published the last book, it was President Obama who was ruler in US, and he decided to go to Alaska as the first ruling president going to visit the state of Alaska. And what happens when the prime minister in Norway or the foreign minister in Norway say that, no, we will go there and there to see if there are opportunities to develop values, then all the business will go there. So a lot of people all around, international investors, they went to Alaska and they started to search for books dealing with the Arctic and economic potential. And then they found the book of Anatoly and us. And therefore, it became quite an important book. So it has to do with having luck too. But of course, to be relevant is very important, to ask questions that we think people are thinking about. And we in our group, especially Salve, was mentioning the green development or the political parties, let's say the ideologists that say that the world will collapse if we are not stopping using oil and gas and something like that. So it means that people are thinking about the same questions as us. So I think this has been very, very good. And I know that the rest of the process is in very good hands because Andrei Mineev, as Anatoly said, he has hold in the project, and together with Anatoly, he will continue. So I feel sure that the book will be a bestseller. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frode. Ulgeir, do you have a microphone? Yeah.
Thank you very much. As a representative of the younger generation, I thought I was going to say something about the parallel world. Because we are speaking about the cyber room, and I'm basically a mathematician, so I'm very fond of this quantum technology and parallel universe and all of these things. But for the time being, we have a parallel universe existing that we are not paying very much attention to. And I started to look into this by by looking into the problems that we have in the northern part of Norway with all the younger men which doesn't finish education. And what are they doing? And we are running around and we are talking with them, and the parents said that they are mostly gaming, and they are sitting in their rooms and they are playing games. So I was a little bit curious, so I started to investigate this a little bit. And I found out that indeed they are gaming, but they are not only gaming. They are living their lives in cyberspace. They meet friends, they develop designs, they do some programming, they exchange information, they have discussions that, all my hair fell off when I took part in some of this discussion. They are very well advanced in the way they are seeing the world and seeing the future of this. So my advice to you when you are going to continue this process and working with scenarios, it might be of interest also for you to look into this parallel dimension and speak with some of the people that is living there and is actually doing fine, even though it doesn't look like that from the outside, from our, I'm not that young, but from the adult side. But it's a lot of interesting things that you could learn from them, and we could have some new views on what the future might bring. That was not a question, it was a comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Holger. Okay, no questions from the internet, Elena? Or there is something?
I think we have one question from the chat. It's a question from Arctic Norway Tales, from Millennium. Great seminar. Okay. You talk about all transport. What about regular trade and tourism? How will it affect the Arctic? Tourism and regular trade, maybe.
Okay, what do you think?
Well, as soon as we get out of this corona phase in the world, I think tourism will pick up. But if you think about the long term, it's difficult to tell really how much strain this will put on the Arctic environment. But as I take it, this will vary from region to region in the Arctic. But generally speaking, I think this will pick up.
Yeah. Peter, what do you think?
I think that was well put.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. Now I think we can conclude the session. Thank you very much again to
Thank you.
the speakers, to the groups, to the audience. We will continue working with this project, and hopefully next year we will come up with a new book which we will present and publish. Thank you very much.
Har du flyet tenkt på?